In the early morning hours of March 1487, atop the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital that once stood where Mexico City now sprawls, the newly completed Templo Mayor gleamed with fresh paint and the blood of countless victims. Emperor Ahuitzotl presided over what Spanish chroniclers would later claim was the sacrifice of 84,400 captives during a 4-day dedication ceremony. While modern scholars debate these numbers, suggesting a more likely figure in the thousands, the scale remains staggering. The temple's twin shrines honored Huitzilopochtli, the patron deity of the Mexica people, and Tlaloc, the ancient rain god. Row upon row of victims ascended the temple's steep steps before having their hearts extracted by practiced priests wielding obsidian knives. The ceremony, known as tlacaxipehualiztli, coincided with the solar year and was recorded in the Codex Telleriano-Remensis with vivid illustrations of blood cascading down the temple steps in torrents described as precious water, chalchihuatl. The Aztec Empire, which dominated central Mexico from approximately 1428 until the Spanish conquest in 1521, institutionalized human sacrifice on an unprecedented scale. Yet the practice extended far beyond mere bloodlust or intimidation tactics. It represented the fulfillment of a cosmic obligation, a sacred necessity that maintained the very fabric of existence. The empire's capital, Tenochtitlan, housed some 600 temples, each requiring regular offerings. Archaeological excavations at the Templo Mayor, led by Eduardo Matos Moctezuma beginning in 1978, have unearthed caches containing thousands of sacrificial artifacts, including ceremonial knives, tecpatl, skull masks, calaveras, and the remains of dedicated offerings ranging from jaguars to children. The Aztec worldview positioned humans in a perilous universe where gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. At Teotihuacan, believed to be the site of creation, the gods gathered in darkness. There, divine beings, Nanahuatzin and Tecuchistecatl, threw themselves into flames, transforming into the sun and moon. Other deities sacrificed themselves to set these celestial bodies in motion. According to the Florentine Codex, compiled by Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún between 1545 and 1590, the primary deity, Huitzilopochtli, whose name means hummingbird of the left or hummingbird of the south, required regular nourishment through chalchihuatl or precious water, blood, to continue his daily battle against darkness and maintain cosmic order. The Chimalpopoca Codex recounts that without such sacrifices, the sun would cease to move and there would be death throughout the world. The Mexica elders expressed this worldview succinctly. With blood you give life to the sun, nourish him so that he may carry out his tasks. Each day represented Huitzilopochtli's triumph over his sister Coyolxauhqui and the 400 southerners, his nephews, who had attempted to kill him and his mother. This cosmic battle played out in perpetuity, requiring human intervention through blood offerings to ensure the sun's continued movement across the sky. The massive Coyolxauhqui stone, discovered in 1978 at the base of the Templo Mayor, graphically depicts the dismembered goddess, a powerful reminder of this mythic conflict. Standing nearly 11 feet in diameter and weighing approximately 8 tons, the stone lay precisely at the foot of the stairs leading to Huitzilopochtli's shrine, symbolizing his victory. In 1520, just before the Spanish conquest, the Aztec philosopher king Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco reportedly contemplated this brutal cosmology, saying, "Truly do we live on earth? Not forever on earth, only a little while here. Though it be jade, it will be broken. Though it be gold, it will pass away." This poignant reflection illuminates how the ephemeral nature of life gave meaning to sacrifice. Death was inevitable, but through sacred death, one achieved transcendence. Nezahualcóyotl, whose name means fasting coyote, ruled Texcoco from 1429 to 1472 and was renowned for his poetry and philosophical insights. Though he participated in the state religion, historical accounts suggest he maintained a personal shrine to an abstract, unnamed deity, perhaps reflecting his ambivalence toward the bloodier aspects of Aztec worship. Huitzilopochtli's insatiable hunger drove the Aztec military machine. The empire expanded rapidly through the Flower Wars, chalchihuatl, ritualized conflicts designed not for territorial gain, but specifically to capture warriors for sacrifice. After the Triple Alliance formed between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan around 1428, these campaigns intensified. Historical records from tribute lists found in the Codex Mendoza indicate that by the early 16th century, over 370 city-states paid regular tribute to the empire, including human victims. The city of Tlaxcala, a fierce holdout against Aztec domination, participated in these flower wars despite never being conquered. Tlaxcalan warriors understood they might be captured and sacrificed, but approached these battles as opportunities to display courage and potentially earn glory through death by the obsidian knife. Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who accompanied Hernán Cortés in 1519, described the horrific scene at one temple. They had many idols, and they had braziers with incense burning, and many hearts of Indians that they had sacrificed that day. All the walls of that shrine were splashed and caked with blood, and the floor was the same. While potentially exaggerated for European audiences, archaeological evidence confirms extensive sacrificial practices. In his Historia Verdadera de la Conquista de la Nueva España, Diaz further described a skull rack near the Great Temple. There were so many skulls and bones from their sacrifices that it was impossible to count them, and the stench was so great that we could hardly wait to get away. The month of Tlacaxipehualiztli, roughly corresponding to March, hosted perhaps the most gruesome festival in the Aztec religious calendar. The name literally translates to flaying of men, marking the spring equinox and honoring Xipe Totec, the flayed lord who represented agricultural renewal. Victims, primarily captured warriors, underwent gladiatorial sacrifice in a ceremony called tlacaxipehualiztli. Tethered by a rope to a large circular stone called the tlacaxipehualiztli, warriors faced elite Aztec knights armed with obsidian-edged wooden swords. The captives received mock weapons, wooden swords studded with feathers rather than obsidian, ensuring the outcome was predetermined. Diego Duran, a Dominican friar who documented Aztec practices in the 1570s, noted that occasionally exceptional warriors might defeat multiple opponents and earn their freedom, though this was exceedingly rare. According to accounts recorded in the Codex Magliabechiano, after a warrior's inevitable defeat, priests would conduct heart extraction on the stone of sacrifice, tlacaxipehualiztli. The victim's body would then be carefully flayed, the skin removed in one piece with meticulous precision. Priests or privileged warriors wore these human skins for 20 days, literally embodying the deity. The Florentine Codex describes how he who had taken captives put on the skin, he went about everywhere, to every home, dancing. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. Stone sculptures from this period depict priests wearing human skins, with distinctive stitching visible along the back. A remarkable statue of Xipe Totec, found at Templo Mayor, shows the deity wearing a human skin with the hands dangling from the wrists, a visceral representation of the flayed lord concept. In 2019, archaeologists working at the Templo Mayor discovered a skull rack, Tzompantli, containing an estimated 600 skulls, many belonging to women and children, challenging earlier assumptions that only warrior captives met such fates. The rack, measuring approximately 15 meters in diameter, consisted of skulls mortared together in concentric circles, creating a towering display visible throughout the sacred precinct. Lead archaeologist Raúl Barrera noted that many skulls showed evidence of careful preparation, precisely drilled holes for mounting, indicating the ritual significance of these human remains. Blood served as the most precious substance in the Mesoamerican cosmos, more valuable than jade, quetzal feathers, or gold. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiché Maya, describes how humans were created specifically to nourish the gods. Let us make him who will nourish and sustain us. How shall we be invoked? How shall we be worshipped? How shall we be remembered on earth? We have tried with our first creations, our first creatures, but we could not make them praise and venerate us. The text details earlier failed creations, beings made of mud who dissolved in water, and wooden figures who lacked souls, before humans were successfully fashioned from maize. This creation story established blood sacrifice as humanity's fundamental purpose, a cosmological debt owed from the moment of creation. The Spanish conquest brought these practices to an abrupt end. When Cortés and his men first entered Tenochtitlan in November 1519, they were horrified by the skull racks and blood-caked temples. Andrés de Tapia, one of Cortés's captains, counted 136,000 skulls on the main Tzompantli, likely an exaggerated figure, but one that conveys the psychological impact on European observers. The conquistadors destroyed temples, melted down gold ornaments and burned codices, while missionaries worked to eradicate indigenous religious practices. Fray Diego de Landa orchestrated a massive book burning in Yucatan in July 1562, destroying thousands of Maya codices and other religious items he deemed works of the devil. Only 4 pre-Columbian Maya manuscripts survived this cultural devastation. Yet the cultural memory of these rituals persisted in underground practices and syncretic adaptations. In some remote areas, chickens replaced human sacrifices, their blood offered to saints bearing suspicious resemblance to pre-Columbian deities. The spiritual concept of sacrifice transformed but endured. Anthropologist Alan Sandstrom documented contemporary Nahua communities in Veracruz, where paper effigies called seed spirits receive blood offerings from chickens, a direct continuation of pre-Columbian concepts of nourishing divine forces. Even the Catholic emphasis on Christ's sacrifice and the symbolic consumption of his body and blood provided conceptual bridges that facilitated religious syncretism. In 1790, the famous calendar stone, or sunstone, was unearthed in Mexico City's main plaza during renovations. This massive 24-ton basalt disc depicts the 5 world eras of Aztec cosmology and features Tonatiuh, the sun deity, at its center, his tongue extended as a sacrificial knife. This archaeological discovery sparked renewed scholarly interest in understanding the complex belief systems that motivated such practices. The stone, now housed in Mexico's National Anthropology Museum, displays the Aztec cosmological symbol Olin, movement, at its center, reinforcing how sacrifice maintained cosmic motion. When first discovered, the calendar stone was nearly destroyed by church authorities, who viewed it as idolatrous, but was saved by Alexander von Humboldt, who recognized its scientific and historical value. Justice, blood, and order, the striking paradox of Aztec lore. The sun rose over the bustling marketplace of Tlatelolco on a spring morning in 1519, illuminating a scene that would soon become seared into Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz del Castillo's memory. Among the estimated 60,000 people trading everything from gold to chocolate, 2 figures stood bound and immobile, a wooden collar device called a Ahuitzotl encircling their necks. Their crime, petty theft of a few pieces of jewelry. Their punishment, public humiliation before potential execution. This snapshot of Aztec justice, witnessed just months before the Spanish conquest would begin to dismantle a sophisticated legal system centuries in the making, reveals the complex interplay between harsh punishment and social order that characterized law in the Triple Alliance Empire. "We saw justice administered daily," wrote Diaz del Castillo, "and for criminals who stole, they put collars around their necks made of wooden staves, and there they stood displayed to all the marketplace." The Aztec civilization, which dominated central Mexico from approximately 1428 until 1521, developed a legal framework that might appear paradoxical to modern observers. Despite conducting ritualized human sacrifice and waging flower wars specifically to capture victims for religious ceremonies, the Mexica people, commonly known as Aztecs, maintained an intricate justice system that governed everyday behavior with remarkable precision and, in many ways, progressive sensibilities. This legal system functioned through a combination of written codes, oral traditions, and established courts that maintained social cohesion among the empire's estimated population of 5–6 million people. The Emperor Moctezuma II was said to have personally adjudicated complex cases every 12 days while seated on his Ikpali throne in the Tecpancali Palace of Tenochtitlan, demonstrating the integration of judicial authority with political leadership. According to conquistador Andrés de Tapia, Moctezuma was known to disguise himself as a commoner to observe how justice was administered in local courts, ensuring consistency throughout his realm. The foundation of Aztec law crystallized during the reign of Nezahualcóyotl, the philosopher king of Texcoco, who alongside his counterparts in Tenochtitlan and Tlacopan established the Triple Alliance. Nezahualcóyotl commissioned an extensive legal code of 80 laws around 1450, which historian Jerome A. Offner extensively documented in his pivotal work, Law and Politics in Aztec Texcoco. This legal code addressed crimes ranging from theft and adultery to public drunkenness and treason. The punishment matrix followed a straightforward principle. The severity of consequences increased with the offender's social status, operating under the belief that those of higher rank bore greater responsibility to model proper behavior. Fernando de Alva Ixtlilxochitl, a descendant of Nezahualcóyotl, writing in the early 17th century, recorded that the philosopher king famously executed his own son for having an affair with a married woman, stating, "The law is above my blood, and my heart may weep while my hands deliver justice." This dramatic enforcement, whether historically accurate or mythologized, illustrates the Aztec principle that justice applied even to the most privileged. According to the Florentine Codex, compiled by Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún in the 16th century through interviews with Aztec elders and nobles, theft constituted one of the most serious crimes in a society where personal property was considered sacred. The Codex recounts that for first-time offenders who stole items of modest value, punishment might include restitution and public shaming. However, repeat offenders or those who stole valuable goods faced increasingly severe penalties. Those caught stealing in the marketplace, the economic and social heart of Aztec communities, might be immediately bound to a wooden frame called a temazcali for public display before sentencing. For theft of agricultural products, especially crucial maize, the consequences could be equally severe. The Codex Mendoza illustrates a thief of maize being strangled with a wooden garrote. Notes accompanying the illustration explain that food theft was considered particularly egregious because it threatened community survival. However, the system contained nuance. If the thief could prove extreme hunger or need, judges might reduce the punishment to enslavement rather than execution, reflecting a pragmatic approach to justice that considered mitigating circumstances. During the Great Famine of 1450, which devastated the Valley of Mexico under the reign of Moctezuma I, historical records indicate a temporary suspension of harsh penalties for food theft, demonstrating the system's adaptability to extreme conditions. Fray Toribio de Benavente, known as Motolinia, recorded that during this period, many families sold themselves into slavery rather than risk execution for food theft, a stark illustration of the system's severity even when modified for circumstances. Adultery perhaps best exemplifies the complexity of Aztec justice. When Hernán Cortés first encountered Aztec legal proceedings in 1519, he expressed surprise at the severity with which adultery was punished, typically by death through stoning, strangulation, or having one's head crushed between stones. According to accounts compiled by Dominican friar Diego Duran, adulterers were occasionally flayed alive, with their skin displayed as warning. Yet this harshness came with procedural safeguards that would be recognizable in modern courts: evidence requirements, witness testimony, and the right to speak in one's defense. Cortés wrote to Emperor Charles V that their justice in matters of adultery is so precise that no Roman court could surpass it, noting the careful testimonial procedures he witnessed in the Tecali, judicial chambers, of Tenochtitlan. In one case, from approximately 1511, documented by Sahagún's informants, a noblewoman named Tlaloc successfully argued that her supposed adultery occurred while her merchant husband was believed dead after a 2-year absence, resulting in a reduced sentence of public humiliation rather than execution. The Florentine Codex describes a case from approximately 1503, during the reign of Moctezuma II, where a noblewoman accused of adultery successfully defended herself by proving that her accuser had falsified evidence. Not only was she exonerated, but her false accuser received the punishment that would have been administered to her: public strangulation in the marketplace. This incident demonstrates the system's concern with truth-seeking and proportional justice, despite its brutal punishments. The case took place in the Calpulli neighborhood district of Moyotlan in southwestern Tenochtitlan and became something of a cautionary tale, with court officials reportedly referencing it when warning potential accusers about the consequences of false testimony. As recorded by Sahagun, a judicial saying emerged from this case: "The stone that was meant for another may roll back upon you," reflecting the principle that false accusations could rebound upon the accuser. The punishment for adultery varied according to social class and circumstances. For commoners, machwali, both parties in the adulterous relationship typically faced death, though the method might differ by gender. Men were often stoned to death in public, while women might be strangled before their bodies were displayed. According to the Codex Telleriano-Remensis, nobles found guilty of adultery faced additional humiliation, having their heads shaved and ornaments destroyed, before execution, explicitly targeting their social status as part of the punishment. A ceramic figurine discovered in Tlatelolco in 1968, dating to approximately 1500, depicts what appears to be an adulterous noble with shaved head and torn ear spools, visual evidence of how status-specific punishments were represented in Aztec material culture. One of the most distinctive features of Aztec law was the graduated system of shame punishments applied to lesser offenses. Public drunkenness, for instance, carried different penalties depending on the offender's age, status, and the context of the violation. Young people caught intoxicated might have their heads publicly shaved, a significant humiliation in a culture where hairstyles indicated social standing. According to Sahagun's informants, repeat offenders might have their homes demolished, a powerful community statement in a society where home ownership represented family stability and social connection. The codices depict specialized officials called tlacatihuatl, who carried out these demolitions using ceremonial axes, destroying the offender's dwelling stone by stone while community members watched. This punishment was particularly associated with the festival of Panquetzalistli, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, when alcohol restrictions were heightened and enforcement became more vigilant across the empire. For nobles, public intoxication carried even greater shame. The Codex Mendoza illustrates a case from approximately 1490, where a drunken noble was publicly stripped of his jewelry, cloaks, and status symbols before being executed. The accompanying text explains that this represented a social death preceding physical death, as the community witnessed the individual's removal from the noble class. Commoners, by contrast, might be sentenced to temporary enslavement or public labor for similar offenses. In a notable case from the reign of Ahuitzotl, recorded in the Annales de Cuautitlan, a group of intoxicated pipiltin, nobles, who disrupted a religious ceremony, were publicly degraded by having their lip and ear ornaments removed in the central plaza of Tenochtitlan, with court officials specifically stating, "You have lost the right to be addressed as Lord, Tuchtli, for you have behaved as a commoner in your drunkenness." Minor theft or social disruptions often resulted in the Huitzilopochtli punishment, the wooden collar device observed by Spanish chroniclers. This restraint device, worn for days or even weeks, prevented the offender from eating or drinking without assistance, forcing them to rely on community members' charity and thereby reinforcing social interdependence. The Florentine Codex notes that individuals wearing the Huitzilopochtli often had their faces blackened with ash or paint, visually marking their transgression. Archaeological remains of these wooden collars, discovered at sites in Tlatelolco and analyzed by archaeologist Salvador Guillem Arroyo in 2001, show they were constructed from cedar wood, with obsidian inlays marking the severity of the offense, 1, 2, or 3 inlays indicating first, second, or third offenses, with the weight of the collar increasing accordingly. Interestingly, lying in court or providing false testimony was treated with particular severity. The Texcocan legal code of Nezahualcóyotl specified that false witnesses would have their lips severed, a symbolic punishment connecting the body part that produced the falsehood with the consequence. The Aztec legal system operated through a hierarchical court structure that would seem remarkably familiar to modern legal scholars. At the neighborhood level, minor disputes were handled by local judges called Tecutlatocue, who convened in small stone buildings called tecali. More serious cases advanced to intermediate courts, presided over by magistrates known as tecalco, with the most significant cases reaching the High Court, or Tlacaxipehualiztli, where rulers themselves might adjudicate alongside professional judges. Archaeological excavations in Mexico City have uncovered the foundations of what appears to be the central court at Tenochtitlan, which operated daily from sunrise until midday, according to Spanish accounts. The court building featured elevated stone platforms where judges sat, separated from petitioners by symbolic distance that reinforced authority. According to Zarita's documentation, judges were prohibited from accepting gifts or payments, with severe penalties, including death, for those found corrupting the judicial process. A remarkable discovery in 1992 by archaeologist Raul Arana included what appears to be a judge's bench containing alcoves for storing case records written on amate paper, along with an inkwell and remnants of judicial emblems, offering tangible evidence of the administrative sophistication of these courts. In his Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, Bishop Diego de Landa noted with reluctant admiration that Aztec judges neither received presents nor were respecters of persons, contrasting this with the corruption he observed in Spanish colonial courts. One fascinating aspect of Aztec justice was the prison system, or rather, the near absence of long-term incarceration as punishment. Instead of lengthy imprisonment, the Aztecs utilized temporary detention facilities called telpiloyan, essentially wooden cages, where offenders awaited trial or execution. According to the Florentine Codex, these detention cages were deliberately uncomfortable, with limited food and exposure to elements, but were not intended as punishment themselves, merely as holding facilities. Spanish chronicler Francisco López de Gomara recorded his surprise at this system, writing in 1552 that they hold prisoners only until their sentences are pronounced, not as punishment itself, for they consider confinement without purpose to be a waste of a person's labor and a burden on others. The concept of restitution played a crucial role in Aztec justice. For property crimes, offenders were typically required to return stolen goods or their equivalent value, often with additional compensation to the victim. This restitution principle extended to more serious offenses. If a person injured another in a fight, they might be responsible for the victim's medical care and lost wages. The Codex Mendoza illustrates a case where a thief was sentenced to slavery, specifically to work off the value of stolen goods, with the proceeds going to the victim. Perhaps most surprising to modern observers is the Aztec approach to rehabilitation. For first-time offenders, particularly youth, punishment often included an educational component. Young thieves might be required to apprentice with craftsmen, learning skills that would provide legitimate income. The Florentine Codex describes specialized schools where young offenders received both punishment and training, with the explicit goal of reintegrating them into society as productive members. This rehabilitative approach existed alongside, not in place of, severe consequences for repeat offenders. The Telpochtli youth houses in each calpulli sometimes incorporated reformation programs for juvenile offenders, combining harsh discipline with practical education. According to accounts collected by Juan Bautista Pomar in his 1582 Relación de Texcoco, young offenders might be assigned to skilled artisans like featherworkers, a manteca, or goldsmiths Teocuitlapizca, specifically to learn trades that would prevent future theft out of economic necessity. The Spanish conquest beginning in 1519 progressively dismantled this legal system, though elements persisted in colonial administration. Cortés himself expressed reluctant admiration for certain aspects of Aztec justice in his letters to Emperor Charles V, writing in 1520, "They have laws which they enforce with such determination that one cannot help but marvel at their effectiveness." Spanish authorities initially maintained some local judicial structures, while gradually imposing Spanish law, creating a hybrid system that persisted for decades in some regions. The Juzgado General de Indios, established in 1585, incorporated elements of pre-Columbian procedure while imposing Catholic moral frameworks, with indigenous judges, jueces gobernadores, sometimes applying principles from both traditions. Chronicler Jeronimo de Mendieta observed in 1596 that, although the old punishments have been abolished as contrary to human nature, the Indians still respect the underlying principles of their ancient laws, which in many cases exceed our own in both justice and wisdom. The year of living divinely, blood rituals and god impersonators. The priest's obsidian blade caught the first light of dawn as it descended toward the chest of a young man adorned in turquoise and gold. This was no ordinary execution, but the culmination of a year-long divine masquerade in Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, around May 1502. The victim, chosen for his physical perfection, had lived for the past year as Tezcatlipoca incarnate, the smoking mirror, deity of night and sorcery. For 12 moons, he walked the city as a living god, playing divine melodies on his flute, receiving adoration from nobles, and taking 4 young women as his wives. Now, atop the Templo Mayor, his heart would be offered to the sun, his blood nourishing the cosmic order, and his flesh consumed by the nobility in one of history's most elaborate religio-political performances. During the reign of Emperor Ahuitzotl, one particularly renowned Tezcatlipoca impersonator, named Tlacotzin, was said to have composed poems of such beauty during his year of divine embodiment that they continued to be recited decades after his sacrifice. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún preserved one such fragment. "My heart blooms like a flower before the Lord of the near and far, for I am but smoke and mirror, passing yet eternal." This practice, known as Ixiptla, god impersonation, represents just one facet of the complex, often unsettling religious traditions that pervaded Mesoamerican civilization. Far from the simplified narrative of primitive bloodlust that dominated early Spanish accounts, these rituals formed part of a sophisticated cosmological understanding where the boundary between human and divine constantly blurred, creating a sacred theater of transformative violence that both horrified outside observers and maintained social cohesion for those within the culture. The Nahuatl linguist Francis Cartunen has suggested that the term Ixiptla itself contains the root xip, skin or covering, and implies both image and flayed one, embodying the paradoxical nature of these divine vessels as both sacred and ultimately disposable. The Ixiptla tradition reached its zenith during the Toxcatl festival, honoring Tezcatlipoca each May. According to Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún's Florentine Codex, compiled from interviews with indigenous informants between 1545 and 1590, the selection process began a full year before the sacrifice. Scouts searched the empire for a young man of perfect proportions and unblemished skin who would literally embody the deity. Once chosen, the youth underwent rigorous training in noble arts, flute playing, proper speech, flower arrangement, as physical preparations transformed him into the god's earthly vessel. His skin was polished to a lustrous glow, his hair arranged in the divine style, and his body adorned with the god's distinctive ornaments including obsidian mirrors, quetzal feathers, and gold jewelry. The renowned Mexica poet Ayocuan Quetzalcoatzin, who lived around 1500, described the Ixiptla as neither man nor god, but the sacred bridge between realms, the walking path through which eternity visits our fleeting world. Spanish chronicler Diego Duran recorded how the chosen Huitzilopochtli lived in palatial accommodations while performing ceremonial duties. He walked about very proudly, Duran wrote, smelling his bouquets, with pages accompanying him, and went to places where there were dances and rejoicings. 4 beautiful young women, themselves impersonating goddesses with names like Flower Garland and Precious Feather, served as his companions. However, through all this splendor, 8 attendants constantly surrounded him, guards disguised as honor-bearers who ensured the living deity could not escape his inevitable fate. A curious detail noted by both Duran and Sahagun was that the Tezcatlipoca Huitzilopochtli received specialized training in the teponaztli, a horizontal wooden drum with 2 tongues that produced distinct tones. The instrument's dual sounds symbolized Tezcatlipoca's nature as lord of dualities, night and day, creation and destruction. When Moctezuma II became emperor in 1502, he reportedly had a particular favorite Huitzilopochtli named Tlalhuicol, who played this instrument with such skill that the emperor considered breaking tradition to spare him, but ultimately the cosmic order required his sacrifice. 20 days before the sacrifice, the Huitzilopochtli's divine status underwent a symbolic transformation. His rich garments were exchanged for warrior attire, and his divine wives increased to 8 as his final mortal pleasures intensified. During this period, he traveled by canoe to a small shrine called Tlacochcalco at the edge of Lake Texcoco for a poignant ritual. There, alone, he broke his flutes, one on each step of the temple as he ascended, symbolizing the abandonment of earthly pleasures before his cosmic transfiguration. A remarkable detail preserved in the Codex Telleriano-Remensis shows that the route taken by the canoe followed a specific path mirroring the constellation Mamalhuazli, Orion's belt, reinforcing the cosmic dimensions of this journey. Ethnohistorian Guilhem Olivier has identified a Nahuatl poem recorded around 1550 that may reference this moment. The flute shatters on stone, its music returns to silence. The god-man ascends, each broken note a step toward heaven's embrace. On the final day, the Huitzilopochtli ascended the steps of the Templo Mayor voluntarily, displaying the courage expected of one representing the creator of warriors. At the summit, priests restrained him on the sacrificial stone, where the high priest opened his chest with an obsidian knife and extracted the still-beating heart. Unlike ordinary sacrifices, the god impersonator's body received special treatment. His flesh became teoqualo, God is eaten, ritually consumed by nobility in a communion meant to absorb divine essence. When Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado disrupted the Toxquetl festival in 1520, triggering the massacre that helped precipitate the fall of Tenochtitlan, he specifically targeted the Tezcatlipoca Huitzilopochtli and the nobles prepared to consume the divine flesh. This intervention was not random, but strategically aimed at the ceremonial heart of Aztec political religious authority. Female deities also required embodiment. During Oxpaniztli in September, a woman impersonated the earth goddess Tochi, our grandmother, for several weeks. According to Sahagun's accounts, after her sacrifice, her skin was worn by a priest who symbolically gave birth to an impersonator of Huitzilopochtli, the corn deity, a literal representation of Earth's generative power. Donna Marina La Malinche, Cortez's indigenous translator, reportedly explained this ritual to the Spanish by drawing analogies to the Catholic veneration of saints' relics, noting that, just as you preserve the bones of holy men, we preserve the skins of those who have become gods. The concept of ritual consumption extended far beyond the Huitzilopochtli tradition. Anthropologist Michael Harner's controversial 1977 analysis proposed that Aztec cannibalism served primarily as a protein source in a land without large domesticated animals, a theory largely dismissed by subsequent scholarship. More compelling is the explanation found in indigenous sources themselves, which consistently frame consumption as communion rather than nutrition. The Chronica Mexicayotl, compiled by Fernando Alvarado Tezozomoc around 1598 from earlier Nahuatl sources, describes the ritual consumption using the phrase "in inakayo mochihuayatl," their flesh became God, employing terminology strikingly similar to the Catholic concept of transubstantiation. Emperor Moctezuma II supposedly told his nobles before such a meal, "It is not I whom you shall eat, but the God himself who enters you through this blessed flesh." The Florentine Codex describes how after certain sacrifices, the victim's body was distributed according to strict hierarchical protocols. The heart, considered the seat of divine energy, Teiolia, went to the sun deity. The most prestigious portions, thighs and arms, were reserved for rulers and high priests. The hands often went to warriors who had captured the victim, while lesser parts were distributed to nobles of decreasing rank. Commoners rarely, if ever, participated in ritual consumption. A fascinating detail recorded by Sahagun was that the left thigh was considered particularly sacred when consuming the flesh of a Huitzilopochtli Ixiptla, as this embodied the god's name, hummingbird of the left. Each consumption followed specific preparation methods depending on the deity being honored. For Huitzilopochtli, the patron war god, the flesh might be prepared in a stew called tlacatlaoli with maize, while for agricultural deities, the preparation might include chili and squash blossoms. Far from being consumed ravenously, these ceremonial meals followed elaborate etiquette reflecting their sacred nature. As Duran recorded, participants ate it with great reverence and solemnity, as though it were a most holy thing. The Relación de Michoacán, documenting practices among the neighboring Purépecha people, whom the Aztecs never conquered, describes how their king refused to participate in anthropophagy despite adopting other Mesoamerican ritual practices, suggesting some regional resistance to the practice. This document quotes the Purépecha ruler Zuangua as stating, "It is one thing to honor the gods with human life, it is another to consume what should return to earth." Particularly unsettling to modern sensibilities were Aztec child sacrifices, especially those dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain deity who controlled agricultural prosperity. During the months of Atlcahualo and Tozostontli, February-March, children with specific physical characteristics, particularly those with 2 cowlicks in their hair or unusual eyes colors, marking them as belonging to Tlaloc, were purchased from impoverished families or selected from slave populations. 16th century chronicler Diego Muñoz Camargo recorded that in years of severe drought, local rulers might personally offer their own children as supreme sacrifices, demonstrating their commitment to community survival over family bonds. This practice apparently occurred in 1454, when Nezahualcóyotl, the philosopher king of Texcoco, reportedly sacrificed his youngest son during a devastating drought, declaring, "How can I ask my people to give what I myself would withhold?" These children, usually between ages 3 and 7, underwent extensive purification rituals before being carried to mountain shrines on litters decorated with feathers and precious stones. They wore headdresses of paper streamers and were adorned with jewelry made of rubber, jade, and precious metals. Most significantly, they were encouraged or forced to cry throughout the procession. As Sahagun recorded, "If the children wept and shed tears abundantly, this was a good omen. It meant rain would be plentiful that year." A particularly haunting detail recorded in the Codex Telleriano-Remensis describes how children destined for Tlaloc were carried facing the sky rather than facing forward during their procession to sacrifice sites, so their tears would fall directly toward the heavens, creating a direct connection between their weeping and the rain being sought. 16th century chronicler Fernando de Alva Ixtlilxochitl, himself of partial indigenous nobility, recorded that children sacrificed to Tlaloc were given a special honorific title after death, Nextlahuali, or debt payment, and their families received social recognition and material compensation, transforming a personal tragedy into a form of public service. The notion of divine impersonation extended beyond human representatives to deities themselves. During Panquetzalistli in December, artisans created a life-sized image of Huitzilopochtli from amaranth seed dough mixed with human blood. This effigy, richly adorned with paint and feathers, received offerings for days before a ritualized killing where the statue was pierced with darts and arrows by warriors. The dough body was then broken apart and distributed among participants, a communion remarkably similar to the Catholic Eucharist that would eventually replace it. The amaranth seeds used in this ritual held special significance. When Cortés sought to suppress indigenous religion after the conquest, he specifically outlawed amaranth cultivation, recognizing its central role in ritual practices. Despite this prohibition, communities in remote areas continued creating miniature versions of these dough effigies, sometimes disguised as Catholic offerings. The more bizarre rituals often incorporated elements of inversion and liminality. During Panquetzalistli, warriors participated in the dance of the Bent One, where they imitated the movements of people with physical deformities or disabilities while engaging in mock combat, symbolically inverting their usual martial prowess. In Tlacaxipehualiztli, priests wearing flayed human skins performed dances where they temporarily embodied both victim and deity, occupying a liminal space between human and divine. A particularly curious ritual recorded in the Codex Magliabaitiano involved gravity-defying flying dancers, voladores, who during the festival of Chalchihuatl descended from tall poles on ropes wound around the top, each performer completing exactly 13 circuits on the way down, with 4 dancers together making 52 revolutions, corresponding to the 52-year Mesoamerican calendar cycle. This ceremony, which remarkably survives today in modified form among Totonac communities, represented the descent of birds associated with warriors' souls from the celestial realm. Duran described a bizarre element of Zyptotec ceremonies where individuals suffering from skin diseases would approach priests wearing flayed human skins and beg for healing. The priests would then rub the skin's decomposing flesh on the afflicted areas, creating a sympathetic healing magic based on the deity's ability to shed and renew skin. This conceptual framework extended beyond the Aztec Empire to other Mesoamerican cultures. Maya elites engaged in elaborate bloodletting rituals, drawing blood from their tongues and intimate parts using stingray spines and obsidian blades. Images from sites like Yaxchilan depict royal women pulling thorned ropes through their tongues, while kings perforated their most intimate place to produce blood-soaked paper that was burned as divine sustenance. These auto-sacrificial practices complemented rather than replaced human sacrifice. A remarkable architectural feature discovered at the Maya site of Palenque in 1999 includes a hidden water channel beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions that archaeologist Arnoldo González Cruz determined was designed to carry water from the mountain behind the temple to beneath King Pacal's sarcophagus. When rainfall was abundant, it created the impression that the deceased king himself produced water, a literal manifestation of the belief that royal blood and bodily fluids generated agricultural fertility. And so, as the sun sets behind the Great Templo Mayor, we step away from the smoke of copal and the rhythm of drums echoing through time. The Aztecs lived in communion with their gods through blood, fire, song, and sacrifice. As Moctezuma II once said, "We are mortals and must give the gods what they gave us, life." Whether in honor, fear, or reverence, their rituals stitched the heavens and the earth together, one obsidian blade at a time. Thanks for diving into the heart of Aztec mystery with us. Until next time, Tlacaxipehualiztli and goodbye.